She says, I'm fine. He thinks, good, she's fine. She thinks, how can he possibly think that I'm fine? Same words, same conversation, but two completely different messages. Men and women may speak the same language, but we do not always interpret, notice, or communicate in the same way. This episode is going to discuss 5 main reasons why men and women struggle to communicate and how we might be better able to communicate with each other. So, without further ado, I just want to say thank you for tuning in and watching my podcast. Thank you for all your support to date. If you're not already subscribed or following me across my social media, please do so if you can. But yeah, I just thought I'd open up by saying I'm making this video off the back of a conversation I had with a really lovely woman last night. And the context for that conversation was actually regarding something horrible that I had said and done to her over a decade ago, and tried to apologize to her for in the preceding years after that, but never quite got to do that in a proper and genuine way. So I finally got that chance last night, and we're having a conversation, and then it formed, unfortunately, into an argument which I sort of set up by accident with no ill intent, but it unfortunately went that way. So I feel like I want to make this video as a way to learn about how I can actually communicate better and how men in general can communicate better with women as well. So this is a video for you, and you know who you are. So the first thing I want to talk about is how men focus on things and women focus on people. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there were studies that were done at the University of Western Australia and also the University of Illinois as well. And that study was in 2025 and looked at a sample size of over 109,460 people across 57 countries. So a very large study. And quite simply, it found that men had stronger realistic interests, and those interests revolved around things like tools and machines and practical systems, which might explain why a lot of men go into trades, or if they study at university, they do things like engineering or the hard sciences. Now, what did they find with women? Well, they found that women had stronger social interests. So what does that mean? Well, it means obviously people, helping out, interpersonal work, and all kinds of work specifically related to community and individuals, okay? Which might also explain why a lot of women focus on work that involves person-to-person interaction, whether it be retail or often if they go to university, things like nursing and education, so being a teacher, which is really important. Now, if we know this, what does that mean for men communicating with women and how they can improve their communication with women? Well, it means that as a man, you need to listen for people, specifically in the conversation you're having with a woman, if a person should come up or people should come up. And what do I mean by that? Well, relationship details may be part of the point that the woman you're talking to is trying to make, and so it's not irrelevant background information, although you may feel it is and want her to hurry up and get to the point. Well, that's just not how women generally communicate. So you need to listen for people and listen for those personal, things that she's discussing around individuals in her day-to-day life. Okay. Now, what else does it mean? Well, it means you should ask one pretty simple question. How did that affect you? Right? That's what you should ask as a man when you're having a conversation with a woman. How did it affect you? And not only that, what happened with her or him or whoever it is that your partner, for example, was talking about. So that's really important to not be ambiguous and actually engage with that and discuss that with it. It shows you're actively listening, okay? Not only that, you should delay trying to solve the issue. Men have a propensity to jump in and try to solve the issue and discuss ways in which the issue can be solved. But once again, it's important that the man understands the interpersonal issue before changing the topic or offering a fix to the problem or the thing being discussed. Not everything necessarily needs to be fixed, although men have often a fixer type personality, and maybe that's why a lot of great things in civilization have been created by men. Women have obviously created some great things, but disproportionately, a lot of the major things have been created by men who have wanted to fix things and problem solve. Hence why, as I said earlier, they study those areas. So those are some important things that you can do as a man having a conversation with a woman. Now, what's the next point? Well, what we understand is that women empathize more, and men, I should say, systematize more. Tongue twister here, sorry. So what we understand is that women empathize more and men systematize more. Now, how do we know that? We know that from the University of Cambridge study that was done in 2018 across 24 countries, another large multicultural, or I should say cross-cultural study. They looked at more than 500,000 people and found that women on average were higher with empathizing. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise if we know anything about psychometric evaluation and understanding that women have generally higher empathy. And we see that in their day-to-day behavior and how they communicate in adulthood, and even as young girls or children, right? Even toddlers, very young, we see that. Now, what they found also on that was that men had higher, on average, levels of systematizing interest. So they were looking more towards things like rules and patterns and how systems work. Okay, so that's a really interesting thing to see. But this was across 24 countries. Okay, so this is, once again, this is probably more to do with the biological difference between men and women versus either a mix of nature and nurture, or just the nurture side of things, or how you're raised or socially. Those are important factors, but if it's across this level of cross-cultural study, then I think we need to seriously think that this is truly a biological phenomenon. Now, how do we deal with that as men? How do we work to improve how we speak to women? Well, start with some empathy. Men are often criticized for not having much empathy and engaging in empathy. And I failed to do that last night in my conversation with this lovely woman. I messed that up and I feel terrible about it, but I've got to try to get better, I guess. So acknowledging what she feels and needs before analyzing the problem is really the best way to go about it. So acknowledging what she feels and what she's thinking is more important than trying to fix that issue, as I mentioned just a moment ago. And so you can do that in many ways, but a good way to also do it is to ask directly, do you want my advice, right? Or do you want me just to listen? That is one of the biggest things I think you can do as a man when you're with a woman and she's talking to you, is to ask her quite bluntly, do you want my advice or do you want me just to listen for the time being? Okay, that's really important. And why? Because you should be solving second and listening first. Okay, so move to the explanation or solutions after she's felt understood. That's really important. Now, next point. Women prioritize harmony more than men, and men tolerate more friction than women. Once again, how do we know this? Well, we know this from a German study in 2026 across 27 countries with a sample size of 143,313 adults across those 27 countries. So very large cross-cultural study again. And they found that women had moderately high agreeableness, so they're more likely to cooperate or engage with compassion and positive social relations with individuals, whereas they found that men had lower than average agreeableness and greater tolerance for blunt disagreement or interpersonal friction, right? Which may explain again in the workplace. You can say it's sexism, you can say what you want, but one of my earlier videos I did a few weeks ago dispelled the myth of a lot of sexism and bias only at women in the workplace, when it's actually been reduced or it's no longer noticeable across 44 years of data. It's actually still seen in men though, unfortunately. We see that men often will negotiate wages or pay rises or positions of power and move up the ladder, sometimes quicker than women for the same work, okay? So that may be because they're less agreeable and more likely to speak out, whereas women are more agreeable and don't want to rock the boat and cause issues, which is something that we should be encouraging women to work on so that they can pursue the things that they want to pursue in their careers, okay? Now, what does that mean for our communication as men with women and how we can improve? Well, it means to watch for the delivery of what the woman you're speaking to is saying, okay? So the relationship around the disagreement may matter as much as the argument itself, okay? So that's important to understand, is to think about that. And not only that, but it's important to disagree cleanly if needs be. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, state the point without contempt, without being patronizing, without being condescending, and remove as much unnecessary bluntness or escalation as possible in order to have that discussion, right? Because what you need to be doing is you need to be signaling safety. Once again, I failed to do that last night. I'm kicking myself over it. So you can do that by saying, I agree with this point, okay? I'm not attacking you, okay? Or you could say, I disagree with this point. I'm not attacking you, okay? So state where you sit in your position and just reiterate that you're not attacking, you're just inquiring, and that you're either on their side or you may not agree with them, but you're still on their side to some extent. Now, next point. Women read more of the subtext and men need more said out loud, okay? So women read more of the subtext and men need to hear it out loud, okay? Now, how do we know that? Well, Northeastern University in the United States in 2025 did a large meta-analysis where they came out with 1,188 findings across 1,011 studies and a total of 837,637 people. Huge meta-analysis, okay? And what they found with women and girls is that women and girls were better at decoding emotional cues for faces, bodies, and voices, okay? And they found that although that was a small average female advantage, it was extremely consistent within the study. So women were definitely better at decoding emotional cues from faces, bodies, and voices, all right? And it was very consistent, albeit small. Now, what does that mean for men? Again, communicating with women. Well, it means that as men, we need to check the subtext, okay? We need to notice when the words don't match up with the tone and body language, right? There's an incongruence in the matching up of what's being said and the body language and the tonality of what's being said. So we need to look for those subtexts and be sensitive to those, right? Which is important. Now, also, we need to ask and not to simply assume in these situations. Well, what does that mean? Well, you could quite simply ask, you say you were fine, but you don't look fine, right? Just ask the question, you say you were fine, but you don't look fine, right? You don't sound fine, okay? Tune into that, that's important. And invite explicitness as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, I don't mean change the conversation to saying raunchy, right? Although it has its time and its place, let's be honest. But invite explicitness and do what you can to effectively state that what you need is to encourage that woman to speak directly to you and to the things to be said directly to you, and not to assume that you're a mind reader, which a lot of women, let's face it, do. And it's a tale as old as time that women think men are mind readers, and we're not. We're pretty useless at it, as the study shows. So invite that explicitness. Hey, just tell me what you're thinking. Don't be ambiguous. Tell me how you feel. Okay, it's really important. Now, I think that is a super important point. Really, is to try to open that door for that effectively. So now, what else do we know? Well, we know that women talk about the negative, whereas men tend to keep it in, right? Women talk about the negative, whereas men tend to keep it in. Now, how do we know that? Well, we know that across 3 studies from the United States, Italy, and the United Kingdom in 2024. These 3 studies found that men and women showed similar willingness to share positive information, which is great. But in terms of negative information, men showed less desire to disclose it, right? Men were also less likely to actually share negative information. Now, once again, we see this with things like stoicism, men of older generations keeping this in. It's not necessarily that they don't trust their partner with the information. A lot of the time, the things they're struggling with may be so significant that they don't want to burden their partner and they don't want to upset their partner, okay? Because they want to remain strong, or at least appear strong for their partner, so that she can speak about how she feels and feel safe confiding in him and feel confident that he's going to be there for her. So it's to show that they are strong and not weak in any way, which has its problems, obviously, with men. We do need to talk about our feelings to some extent, but it's not just talk about your feelings, right? There are other things that men need and more practical steps. This is why a lot of the therapies in psychology fail men and boys, because it's not that simple, as we can see from the study. So again, what does that mean for men, for us, all right, in communicating with women? Well, there's a few things. Well, you need to explain the silence and talk about the silence, all right? Give a reason to the woman you're speaking with, your partner, for example. And if you need the private processing time for your thoughts and emotions, simply just ask for that rather than withdrawing entirely as a man, okay? Ask for it. Be calm as you can, but ask for that space if you need it, okay? And say it. Say, look, hey, I need some time to process my thoughts, and I'm not shutting you out. I need some time to process my thoughts, but I'm not shutting you out, okay? Then what you need to do is you need to, obviously, at some stage, don't make it too long so that woman is sitting there squirming, thinking she's done something wrong and that she's not enough and you don't trust her. Obviously, re-engage with her and take the space that you need, come back, return to the conversation, and try to resolve the situation. Don't leave it unresolved. You've got to address the issue, right? So that's really important. But look, those are a number of really important points. And I think another thing I want to say is that men are often criticised by women for not showing much emotion. And there is something called Alexithymia, which, if I recall, I may be wrong on this, is significantly more common in men and boys. About 50%, I think, of people with autism spectrum disorder also have alexithymia. And I believe autism and autism spectrum disorder is more common in men and boys. So that explains that. And what is alexithymia? Well, I'm going to butcher this, but effectively it's more of an inability to express how you're feeling about your emotions and to register it in others in that kind of regard. So it can come across as a lack of empathy or a lack of compassion or emotional bluntness. The person may feel sad and upset, but they're not able to articulate it properly. That was a pretty ironic sentence. And therefore, they also struggle with someone else who's going through an issue. They can sort of maybe see they've got an issue and they don't know how to register or how to deal with it. So look that up. That's a really interesting one. Alexithymia. Look up the definition and learn about that as well. So anyway, look, I think the main thing to simply say is that, once again, men and women, we speak the same language, but our communication styles are very different. And it's really important to work on understanding that and to understand that whilst they're not separate languages, psychologically, they're not identical either. They're very different. And we can have these conversations and work on things and understand that there are different ways to approach it without devolving, or whatever you might say, into arguments and anger. All right. So I guess the core lesson really is to not make the mistake that natural communication styles are universal, right? Natural communication styles are not universal. Everyone is different. Every man with every man, or every woman with every woman, and particularly every man with every woman in conversation are different. Men and women do communicate differently as a whole. So I'd love to revisit this and talk about it more. It's a really interesting one. I'll just keep this short and sharp, this video, but please have a listen to it. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you so much for supporting. It's this is an interesting topic, and something personally I now realise I'm not infallible. I'm no paragon of virtue, although I already knew this, and I need to work on that so that I can approach conversations like I had with the young woman last night in a more calm, relaxed, and I guess loving way is the appropriate way to put it in conversations like that. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. So as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.